This is the Registered Behavior Technician course presented by Shaza Attar. The course content was created by Shaza Attar and is the property of Autism Therapy and Training, Inc. All rights are reserved. This training program is based on the Behavior Analyst Certification Board 2018 RBT Task List 2nd edition and is designed to meet the 40-hour training requirement for the RBT credential. The program is offered independent of the BACB. Remember, in each class, we will have our active listening, a quiz, and a competency assessment. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's topic. This is your 1 hour of supervision that we need to cover. But I'm also going to cover communication, communicating with your supervisor, and actively seeking clinical direction, and finally, responding to feedback. So let's get started and jump right into it. Communication in general is important. If we don't express ourselves properly, then that message will be distorted and information may get lost. Things could go wrong and breakdowns begin to occur. Now, this is not specific to your work relationship, but in general. So it's important to understand how you communicate and how you can receive a message effectively. So as we go through this course, I want you to reflect on how you best take information. Is it auditory or visual? And how you send a message to others. If you feel that you're on the quiet side or maybe have difficulty expressing yourself, then through this, my goal is that you can begin to work on these skills and improve your communication with your supervisor and maybe even in general. So let's talk about communication. What is communication? We all have a concept of what it means, but let's break it down further. Communication is the act of transferring information. It is a technique for expressing ideas effectively and encoding information, such as words, laughter, and facial expressions. For example, if someone says, "Wow, that looks great on you," you take that information as a compliment, possibly. What if I said, "Wow, that looks great on you"? How does that sound? If you pay attention to the way that I said it and my tone of voice, even the expressions on my face, you may take that as sarcasm. So we as listeners and communicators can pick up on these subtle ways of how people are speaking and can give us a better understanding of what they really mean. We do this without thinking, but we attend to these nonverbal cues and voice changes that will impact our understanding of the information given. Most conflicts occur because of poor communication. This can include misunderstandings or not delivering the message properly. Poor communication can also decrease work productivity and create barriers. Poor communication is often because we do things like interrupting others. We may multitask. Our eyes may shift away from the speaker because we're attending to something else, signaling to the speaker that we're distracted and not paying attention. When our attention is diverted because we're doing other things or looking at something else, our attention is not focused on the person or the speaker, but rather our attention is divided. And so communication can start to break down. Have you ever spoken to someone who is writing something and listening to you at the same time? What usually happens? Well, they may ask you to repeat it because they missed information, or they say, okay, yeah, that's fine. But later, they may get upset because you did something wrong in their opinion, but they had given you the okay. As you can see, if the listener was listening, then our message would have been delivered properly. But it's also how we deliver that message. Rambling and talking on and on and on and on and on can lose your listener. So avoid excessive talking and get to the point. If you need to tell your supervisor about a learner or an update from a client, you can say, "Shaza, Mrs. Smith gave me an update about Johnny's new medication. The dose has changed. I have updated his file and graphs show that as well. Just wanted to let you know." versus something like, "Hi, Shaza. Mrs. Smith came in today and she was telling me about Johnny. Johnny is on that medication and the dose has changed. I think he was on 5 milligrams and now it's been increased to maybe 10 milligrams. I have to check the file again. Mom said that the doctor was concerned with, well, I think you get my point, yes?" Okay. You can write the details in the note, and if your supervisor wanted all the details, they can review it with you. Or while you update them, they may ask you for more information, and that's a good time to share it. Poor communication can also occur when we are stressed or emotionally overwhelmed. Again, the message may not be delivered properly because of our emotional state. Poor communication is also when we have a lack of focus. Again, that divided attention. And lastly, body language is crucial in communication. Sometimes our body language is inconsistent with our speech or show negative body language, such as crossing your arms. The quality of speech is important. Talking too fast, slurred speech, or even talking too slow can impact a message that we're trying to deliver, and it can be delivered in a negative way. So be careful with that and pay attention to how you speak. If you talk too fast, often that can show a lack of confidence as you whip through your message. Lastly, assumptions. If we assume things, we're already breaking down the success of our message. If you're the listener or speaker, for example, if you came to me and said, "Jenny the RBT is an unethical person and she lied," and you came with that assumption about Jenny without investigating why you think she's unethical and lying. So this was an actual incident. A therapist told me that she believed that a therapist was lying and therefore unethical. Now, when this happens, I take this very seriously and investigate the situation. So I spoke to the therapist about the incident and what had happened. And what happened was that the therapist was walking out a learner at the end of the day, but didn't tell the grandparents about the problem behavior that had occurred during the day. The therapist felt at the time it wasn't appropriate to update the grandparents and felt it would be best to just notify the parents through an email or a phone call. So having these assumptions and accusing someone can really destroy the communication and relationship. So this brings us to effective communication. What is effective? In order for something to be effective, it must successfully produce a desired or intended result. Think about effective intervention for your client. If it's effective, then we should see results. The learner is talking or learning new skills. If it is not effective, then we would not be seeing those positive changes. This would also apply to communication. With effective communication, we also need to understand the emotions and intentions behind the message. Suppose your client said, "I really need my son to talk." We need to understand that that's what's really important for that client, and having their child speaking is what's important to them. And so when we update them on progress, one of the things they probably want to hear is that their child spoke or produced words and so on. It's important that we clearly convey a message in order for it to be effective. Again, short and sweet and to the point. Clearly spoken, no rambling. We'll often get that message where it needs to go. Effective communication is essential for the success in any field of work. Strong communication skills is important. Remember, communication is a two-way process where the speaker and listener are communicating, taking information back and forth. In your daily work, you will need to effectively communicate with a supervisor in an ongoing manner. I'll discuss this further as we continue talking about communication and supervision. So hang in there. So let's move on to the types of communication. But before we do, let's do a secret word. The word is escape. E-S-C-A-P-E. Sometimes when someone is talking to you, you just want to escape. Okay, let's continue. The first type I want to discuss is verbal communication. This is when you deliver information by use of spoken words. If you give a clear message and easy to follow directions over the phone, then you have good verbal communication. You can put this to the test by telling someone to do something and see if they can do it. If they don't follow the instructions properly, then you may need to see why and how you can fix the way you delivered that message. Most often, people can only take in so much information at once. I can say, can you put a condition line and graph it up to date? So this would be a two-step instruction, and someone could possibly follow it. But if I did more than that, then the person may need to start writing it down. So think about this when you're speaking to your clients or supervisor or others that you may be working with. The next type is nonverbal communication. The use of body language and facial expressions. Actors are masters of this style of communication because they've been trained to portray emotions or deliver whole messages simply by the way they hold their body and position their facial expressions. Sometimes we don't control our nonverbal communication, but the message is delivered to the other person and they read it. For example, if you cross your arms while listening to your supervisor, this may signal that you're not taking in the information. So you want to be attentive to those types of nonverbal communication. Our eyes tell us lots about a person. If someone is telling me something and avoiding eye contact, this often signals to me that they're hiding something. When our bodies slump over again, this may be a sign of, they're hiding something or their discomfort or, just that lack of confidence. So keep this in mind as you communicate with others. The other type is written. The conveyance of information or instruction by utilizing the written word. This type of information exchange is often the easiest, especially for people who are uncomfortable with face-to-face encounters. This may include texting, emailing, and so on. But this is also things like communication logs or reports that you may send to your client. So it's important that the message is conveyed accurately and is easy to read and follow. Program sheets, behavior protocols are also written communication. We explain how to run a program or how to handle problem behavior by writing out the steps. If it is not clear, then the team may run it incorrectly. That's why it's important that your supervisor has you read these programs and protocols, but they also review it with you verbally. To be an effective communicator, you need to learn to listen. It's easy for us to talk, but we often fail to listen. So listen and don't think about what you want to say. Listen and take in the information. Be aware of your nonverbal language. If you notice yourself crossing your arms or slouching over, try to change that so that you can welcome the message and be the best communicator possible. And of course, manage your emotions. I say this because a staff member or supervisor or even the client may say something about your performance or give you feedback, and this could affect you emotionally. You might feel hurt, upset, and sometimes our emotions can get the best of us. So try to take the message and manage your emotions to develop the best version of you. I'll discuss this further when I talk about feedback later in class, but I want to give you a little example. If you've ever done an escape room, you'll find that sometimes if you are under that stress and that time, you will find yourself communicating sometimes not as effectively. Your emotions often get the best of you. Knowing that you have that timer going and you only have that hour, you start to rush, or you start to say things, or you might even get angry with the other people that are doing the escape room with you. And as the time gets very close to the end, let's say you've got about 9 minutes left on the clock, you might find that your stress level gets up even higher and your communication starts to break down even more. So these are great practices. If you ever do them with your coworkers or even with your family, you can work on how to develop that communication under those stressful times and apply that same strategy in your work environment. All right, let's continue. Again, to be effective in your communication, have clarity of the message. Know what you want to say. Take a moment to think about what you're trying to say. Otherwise, you end up rambling and taking your listener from one concept to another thought to another, and so on. Organize your thoughts, then speak. Use appropriate language. Don't use slang or inappropriate words. If you have a tendency to swear, try to stop that behavior because it may slip up during your interview with a new job or with a client. Trust me, this has happened. When someone comes in for a job interview and every other word is a swear word, I can't hire someone who speaks this way to the kids or to my clients. Nor do we want that language in a professional environment. But this isn't only swearing, saying negative things about the client or other staff. This can impact communication and relationships. The other thing you want to pay attention to is appropriate timing. Your supervisor may be in the middle of something. You approach them to talk. Ask them if it's the right time to talk about something or if you can meet with them later. This can happen with a client as they're picking up their son or daughter and you're trying to give them an update, but their child is engaging in problem behavior and you find that they're distracted. This may not be an appropriate time to give them that thorough update. You may have to give it to them at a later time or just give them a quick update in the moment and let them know that you will send them an email or you'll add it into the communication log. Next is asking questions. Be sure to ask questions if something is not clear to you. Your supervisor may tell you to do something and you may walk away unclear. Don't feel embarrassed to just ask for clarifications. And lastly, considering the type of audience when you're communicating. Whether it's your supervisor, client, or staff member, you want to be professional with them all. But your language may vary based on the person that you're speaking to. You shouldn't use technical language with a client or other professionals outside of your field, but with your supervisor, you could. When speaking, again, speak with simplicity, be straightforward, take feedback, speak clearly with good articulation, speed, and sequence of speech must also be appropriate, as I mentioned earlier. Not too fast and not too slow. The relationship between the sender and the receiver. When speaking to others, be empathetic, be enthusiastic. Again, language choice is important depending on who you're talking to. With communication, timely responding to correspondences such as calls, texts, and emails is important. If an SLP emailed you directly to discuss a client or a supervisor emailed you, responding within a couple of days may be reasonable. A week or two is not. So be sure that you're checking those regularly. For example, I communicate with all students taking my RBT training online, and usually within the day I will respond back if someone has a question. But imagine you had a question and I didn't respond for 2 weeks. That wouldn't be fair to you. Same thing. If a client had a concern, they would appreciate a response within a couple of days. When communicating with others or attending a meeting, taking notes is important. We can't rely on our memory. By writing things down, you can go back to your notes and follow up with things you need to do and so on. Lastly, remove distractions. We all get distracted. If you're in a meeting, put your phone away. If you're talking to a client at the door, focus on them and remove any other distractions. Or you may need to find a quieter place to speak. Or if the learner you have is running around the room, you may need to find a better time to talk to that person so that you're not leaving the learner alone. You'll find that if you're talking to a parent while their child is running around the room, they're looking at their child and they're distracted. You might be doing the same. Keep these in mind and find some creative solutions to help you and your listeners. So we've talked about communication and the importance of it. But what I want us to focus on now is our main goal of communication, and that is for the purposes of your relationship with your supervisor and for the sake of supervision practices. Let's dissect supervision and determine what that means. According to the BACB Supervision curriculum, supervision is to coordinate the delivery of high-quality services, to lead in a process of creating solutions to problems, to mentor supervisees, to assess, train, and improve the performance of supervisees, to maintain ethical and professional standards. So your supervisor is responsible for ensuring that you are providing quality service. But in order to do so, you and your supervisor need to have ongoing meetings, observations, and communications throughout the course of your relationship. The purpose of supervision is to ensure procedural fidelity. We, the supervisors, need to make sure that programs are running correctly as designed. We need to monitor and evaluate decision-making skills such as professional and ethical decisions. When faced with a situation, did you handle it correctly? Was there a way you could have prevented it? Giving you another way of looking at things and helping you make decisions. And of course, a supervisor will train and coach you along the way. So it's important that you and your supervisor see each other regularly, that you work together, and that you seek your supervisor for direction. Don't wait for them to seek you. You need to approach them and ask or share, and so on. Supervision is also about learning from doing. Your supervisor will encourage you to put your behavior out there so that they can guide you and help you. They will give you feedback and work with you to improve. Let's do a secret word. The word is angel. A-N-G-E-L. Angel. All right, let's continue. Supervisors will also work on your time management skills, organizational skills, teaching you to prioritize. They may work on your social skills, interpersonal skills, and help you with self-selected goals. Ensuring that you and your supervisor have a good relationship is important. Remember, they are not your friend. They shouldn't be your friend. You shouldn't be hanging out with them, doing coffee and dinner, because that may impact the quality of your supervision. So you know that you will be getting feedback from your supervisor, and they're going to be coaching you. So that means you need to be open to that feedback. We'll talk about that later, but now just be open to the idea of getting that feedback and knowing that it's meant to help you grow into a better practitioner. You need to find a supervisor that you respect and has great professionalism, great communication, someone you want to learn from and grow alongside them, someone that will guide you and be honest with you so that you can grow into someone great. Your supervisor may train you on attire, social interactions, attendance, and flexibility. As I just mentioned, when looking for a supervisor, you want someone that you look up to, someone that you value their feedback and support, guidance, and knowledge. If you had a supervisor that was unprofessional, sloppy, rude, and unethical, would you want to learn from them? I don't think you would. So the first step in building a good relationship with a supervisor is deciding on the place of work, the supervisor, and the clients. You'll be working closely with the supervisor. Often during interviews, you meet the HR personnel. You get a tour of the center or place of work, but you may not meet the supervisor. Meeting them and ensuring that it is a good fit is quite important. So I encourage you to meet them, talk to them, have questions for them, such as, how do you support your team? If a child or client was engaging in problem behavior, do you help the team? Or what would I expect? If I need to meet with you, how would we meet? How often would we be meeting? How many supervisees do you have currently? These are some questions you may want to ask. Why? Well, imagine the supervisor had 15 supervisees. Based on their workload, that may be too many for them, unless they have other BCBAs or BCABAs on board helping them out. Too many supervisees may mean that you'll not get the time and attention you deserve. Think about it for a moment. If each RBT was working 40 hours a week, 5% supervision would be 2 hours a week. Now with 15 supervisees, we're looking at 30 hours per week of supervision. Now that's not counting other activities the supervisor has, such as meetings with clients, program writing, creating training material, research, and so on. The supervision volume would be too much for that supervisor, and chances are you'll miss out on quality supervision. So keep that in mind. You also want to know if you'll be getting along with that supervisor. Are they willing to teach you? Will your supervisor give you what you're expecting? So ask those questions. Find out how they'll train you, how often, and how do they provide feedback, and so on. If the supervisor is not available during the interview or is not on site, that could tell you something. And the question is that the environment you want to be in? You want to ensure your supervisor will have you do things that are not unethical. Will you get the training and time from them to be great? Can you approach your supervisor without feeling bad or like you're bothering them? How is their communication? Again, you'll only know by meeting them and talking to them. If you feel comfortable with them, then that's great. Sometimes you have a great relationship with a supervisor, but after a couple of years, things change. You may need to reassess that relationship and whether or not you feel that it's beneficial for you to stay with them or move on to something else. Often, when you start a new job, you're on probation for 3 to 4 months. This is when you can get to know the style of the organization and your supervisor. Every organization will be different, so you'll need to get used to how things run and operate. But most importantly, this is where you build your relationship with your supervisor. So, approach them, talk to them, ask questions, learn from them. If in the first few months you can't, then figure out quickly how you can fix this relationship. You may need to tell your supervisor what you need to learn, or maybe they can do something different to help you out. Most often when a relationship breaks down, people end up quitting on each other. But you may have signed a contract and need to stick to that commitment for ethical reasons, so learn to express clearly what you need and work on improving that relationship. Establish quickly when and how will you and your supervisor communicate. Where will these be held? How often? How are evaluations conducted? You and your supervisor will spend lots of time with each other. With most of my RBTs, I spend about 3 to 4 hours a week with them, if not more. We meet, we do trainings with each other. We also conduct observations with the client. We often discuss data sheets and graphs. We review written protocols and reports, behavior plans, professional behavior, and ethics. We talk about a lot of other things too, dealing with other staff. We talk about personal issues. Sometimes the therapist is going through something difficult in their life, and as their supervisor, I'm there to remind them to balance their life and talk about decisions on what to do in relation to work and the ethical responsibility that they have. You want to be a responsible practitioner and seek clinical direction. If things aren't moving in the right direction for the client and there are issues, you need to speak to your supervisor immediately. You need to update your supervisor about the clients you're working with, programs, parental concerns, and so on. You'll also be discussing program targets, if progression is slow, or if you have any concerns, you need to approach your supervisor about it. You need to communicate any issues occurring with other staff members in order to problem solve. Communicate about personal issues that may be impacting your ability to perform effectively. For some, approaching their supervisor might be difficult, while for others it's not. What you need to keep in mind is, how do you say it? How do you articulate it effectively? Firstly, you want to ensure you use eye contact. Shifting eyes or looking on the floor may send the wrong message to your supervisor. Be confident. Whatever it is that you're talking to them about, having good posture definitely helps. Speaking slowly and clearly. Don't talk too fast or mumble, and don't be nervous around your supervisor. They're there to teach you. They're your teacher, your mentor, and they're there to help you out. All right, Let's take a quick stretch break and let's go into the quiz. And then we're going to continue talking about seeking direction from your supervisor. Good luck on the quiz. Communication is A, the act of transferring information, B, technique for expressing ideas, C, encoding information, D, all of the above, or E, none of the above. And the correct response is D, all of the above. Misunderstandings can occur because A, people don't like to listen, B, selective hearing, C, poor communication, or D, the reality of life. And the correct response is C, poor communication. What is effective? A, an adjective, B, a word meaning something, C, clearly conveying a message, D, not clearly conveying a message, or E, none of the above. And the correct response is C, clearly conveying a message. What can you and your supervisor talk about? A, last night's dinner, B, Saturday plans, C, written protocols and reports, or D, all of the above. And the correct response is C, written protocols and reports. The use of body language and facial expressions to communicate would be A, verbal communication, B, written communication, C, nonverbal communication. And the correct response is C, nonverbal communication. Verbal communication is A, delivering information by the use of written words, B, delivering information by the use of spoken word, C, delivering information by the use of gestures, or D, all of the above. And the correct response is B, delivering information by the use of spoken word. Effective communication is essential for A, misunderstandings, B, success, C, clarity of a message, D, A and C, or E, B and C. And the correct response is E, B and C. All right, welcome back everyone. Let's continue talking about actively seeking clinical direction from your supervisor. In one of our first classes, I mentioned the supervision breakdown. You should meet with your supervisor at least 5% of the time that you're working in ABA services. If you're working 40 hours a week, 5% is about 2 hours a week of time with your supervisor. So you and your supervisor would determine if you're doing 2 hours a week or if you are doing 4 hours bi-weekly. Supervision needs to be ongoing. This means that you should have regular follow-ups, regular check-ins, timely responses to questions and concerns. If you approach your supervisor with a question or concern, they should respond in a timely manner. But remember, you also need to approach them in a timely manner. You notice a problem, or something is not going so great, or you have a question about something. Don't wait weeks before you approach your supervisor. Speak to them immediately. Which takes me to this point here. When do you approach them? Actively seeking direction would mean it's ongoing. It's in action. There is movement. So approach your supervisor if you are doing something that you are not trained on. Ask for guidance. Always run things that are within your competency. Your client is not progressing? Seek guidance. Use data for decision making and approaching your supervisor about problems you observe. You may approach your supervisor if a program or protocol is causing harm to the client or others, or is not running accurately. You find the learner is engaging in more problem behavior during a specific program. You have concerns. You find a behavior protocol is making the behavior more intense, and you're worried about the client's safety. You notice the treatment team is running a program incorrectly. Any of these are valid reasons for you to approach your supervisor. It's important to approach your supervisor immediately. Don't wait weeks before addressing an issue with your supervisor. When parents or clients provide an update, for example, changes, medications that they're on, and so on, what happens if your supervisor is busy, not around, and you fear that you might forget? Well, you can write it down. Leave a sticky note on your clipboard, make a note on your work computer. For example, we use a communication system at work called Slack. We message each other through that so that we can make arrangements to meet or share something that is important, so we don't worry about forgetting about it. But of course, always follow up with your supervisor. Speak to your supervisor about things that are directly impacting your client. For example, if your client is on new medication or they've moved or something else has happened, let your supervisor know so that they can make arrangements to help the client out. This may be making program changes or updating the team. We'll talk about what impacts the client more in our session note class. But remember to reach out to your supervisor in a timely manner. Remember, timely manner means at a reasonable time. Don't wait a week. If your supervisor is on site, notify them immediately. Again, this will depend on your supervisor and what they feel is immediate. Some may want an update right away, some within the day. So talk to your supervisor about that. If your supervisor is off-site, you may call or email them requesting to discuss a learner. Some of you may be doing home-based therapy while others are doing center-based. So each setup is different. Be sure not to use the learner's name in emails. Use their initials to protect their privacy. You may be meeting weekly or bi-weekly with your supervisor. It's best to have a predetermined meeting time and day. Meeting notes are helpful so that you and your supervisor can go back to discuss any misunderstandings that may have occurred. People forget. Going back to those documents is very helpful. When attending a team meeting at your agency or school, take notes during those meetings and create a to-do list for yourself. All right, let's take a big stretch and we're going to get into the quiz, so good luck, and then we're going to return and talk a little bit more. In ABA services, you should meet with your supervisor at least A, 25% of the time, B, 5% of the time, C, 50% of the time, D, all of the time, or E, never. And the correct response is B, 5% of the time. When should you meet with your supervisor? A, when you need to seek direction. B, when doing something that you are not trained on. C, if you find your client is not progressing. Or D, all of the above. And the correct response is D, all of the above. Report to your supervisor when A, there have been changes with your client, you need to talk in distress. C, feel like it. Or D, none of the above. And the correct response is A, when there have been changes with your client. As an RBT, how often should you meet with your supervisor? A, daily, B, weekly, C, monthly, or D, yearly? And the correct response is B, weekly. Now remember, you could be meeting weekly or bi-weekly with them. Why should we keep meeting notes? A, to avoid any misunderstandings. B, to remember what was discussed. C, to know what to prioritize, create a to-do list. Or D, all of the above. And the correct response is D, all of the above. All right, welcome back. Let's take a look at these graphs. I want you to identify the issue and possibly what you could do. So what's wrong here? Well, as you can see, the learner has not made gains in several days. Depending on your criteria at your center, you may have something that says after 5 consecutive days of no probes or something like below 60%. Speak to your supervisor. So in this case, you should be approaching your supervisor to notify them that the learner is not making gains in this program. A revision or change would be needed. But since your supervisor is not seeing the graph daily, they may not be aware of this flat line. So your responsibility is to reach out to them and notify them. Okay, let's try another. Let's take a look at this graph. Is this one okay? Remember, since you're graphing daily or weekly, looking at graphs critically is important. So this graph shows a decreasing trend. The learner got to near 100% after the revision, but then started decreasing. So speak to your supervisor about this. Show them the graph. Identify why this could be happening. Sometimes teaching inconsistencies could be happening among staff, resulting in variable results, or maybe the revision was not effective. So talk to your supervisor. Do you see any issues here? I hope you do, and you should talk to your supervisor. This graph is quite variable. It's going up and down. When you see something like this, you want to bring it up to your supervisor. All right, what's wrong with this one? All right, let me break it down. 1, the program has been running for about 2 months. Let's take a closer look. As you can see here, we have 3 data points that are on a downward trend. This was also a big drop from the previous data point. If you notice something like this, speak to your supervisor. The next part I want to highlight is this part of the graph. If we go back to the original graph very quickly, you see that the skill began to improve for a couple of weeks. Then we see that the skill began to decrease. It's still higher than the last decrease, but we can see that the learner's behavior is not improving. So we need to revisit this program and see what's going on. This is very important for you to approach your supervisor and talk to them about the graph and your concerns. Seeking clinical guidance can be anytime. Ask your supervisor to come and observe a specific program you are unsure of or need some clarifications on. Ask about any issues that come up with caregivers or other professionals. You may also reach out to your supervisor if you are having concerns with other staff, or maybe ethical concerns you may be having as well. Or you need professional guidance. Your supervisor is your support system, your gateway to new knowledge and guidance. Be open and honest. Think of the well-being of your client. Supervision is not about criticizing you, but about helping you be the best that you can be for the sake of your clients. Remember to speak in a professional manner with your supervisor. Be respectful and avoid personal relationships. Remember, they are not your friend, and do your best to avoid such relationships. Make your supervisor aware of personal issues that could affect your work, but avoid irrelevant sharing. Your supervisor should provide behavioral skills training. This is modeling and role-playing things with you, as well as giving you feedback. Observe you weekly or maybe bi-weekly. They'll set performance expectations, train you on problem-solving and decision-making skills, model ethical behaviors, and review all written material. As I mentioned, your supervisor will provide you with feedback, and here are different types of feedback. There's informal feedback, which is the most frequent form. It is provided on a day-to-day basis. It's usually in verbal form. Formal feedback comes as part of a structured assessment. It's usually in a written form. Formative feedback for learning is about a person's progress at a particular time through a course or during the acquisition of a new skill. It provides opportunities to gain feedback. Summative feedback of learning measures performance often against a standard and comes with a mark or grade and feedback to explain your mark. It can be used to rank or judge individuals. As a general rule, it seems that most value feedback more when it is given by someone they respect as a role model. It helps develop a person's competence and confidence. To fill the gap between actual and desired performance and ways to narrow the gaps. Without feedback, there will be a false assessment of one's own skills and abilities, which will cause this buildup of false perception. Who gives feedback? Most often, it's your supervisor. They'll be giving you feedback. But you can give feedback to your supervisor as well. But a peer may give you feedback as well. When giving feedback, I like to use a sandwich approach. It's a strategy I even use with communicating with clients. The sandwich approach starts with positive feedback, then an area of improvement, then ending with some more positive feedback. For example, you've been doing a really good job. I love how you've been so creative with our learners. One thing to work on is your attendance. I think if you work on that, it'll improve your overall work ethic. This would go so nicely with your hard work and organizational skills, which is something we love about you. This is an example of the kind of feedback that would be taken better than saying something like, "Hey, you're late all the time. What's going on?" Sarah is an RBT, and John is the BCBA that oversees her. John has been canceling supervisions. Sarah isn't sure what to say or how to approach it. When John gives her time and meets with her, he's so helpful. He has so much knowledge and is a great listener. What would you say to your supervisor? Well, giving your supervisor feedback can be tough, but saying it in a nice, respectful way may really help your supervisor see the quality of supervision and how it impacts your life in a positive way. That reminder may nudge your supervisor to do a better job. All right, let's go back to effective communication. So now you and your supervisor need to communicate effectively to ensure that your clients are benefiting and your behavior is improving. So let's take a look at some of the barriers of effective communication. Generalized feedback. Sometimes we may make general statements when upset. Someone may say something like, "You always do that. You never listen to me. You just don't seem to care." We want to avoid these because it's not specific to the problem at hand. It's better to pinpoint the issue that you're experiencing. For example, Sarah may tell her supervisor that she has noticed that John, her supervisor, has been canceling many of their sessions. And this is a problem for her as she's not getting her hours in and is worried about her quality of work. Another is lack of respect. Things like rolling your eyes and ignoring the feedback. Sometimes we don't give people feedback because we're afraid that we'll upset the other person, so we avoid it. It's hard to give feedback, but we have to in order to help your team, clients, and ensure quality. But we have a choice of doing it respectfully or not. So my hope is that you and your supervisor will choose to be respectful and work together. Fear of damaging relationships. Sometimes we don't want to tell others about their behavior so that they don't get mad at us or we lose that relationship. But at the end of the day, we need to think about what's best for our client and team. We have a choice of how we say things, as I mentioned above, so be sure to use a respectful way of communicating about the specific issue. When you're going to give feedback, again, this may be you giving feedback to your supervisor, it may be a colleague, whoever it is, plan in advance what you want to say. For example, think about the words before you say them, like, "Excuse me, John, can we talk about my supervision time? I have not been able to document any supervisions with you because of the cancellations. I know you've been quite busy with things and I respect your time, but I want to ensure that I'm meeting the requirements for the BACB. Rather than saying something like, "Arr, you keep canceling these sessions. Geez, when will I ever get my supervisions?" Do it after the situation immediately. Don't wait 3 weeks to bring up an issue. Speak to your supervisor immediately about issues at work, with the team, about a client. And remember, you're talking to your supervisor about many things in regards to your professional, clinical, and ethical work. Think about what you want to achieve. Why are you having this conversation? What do you hope the outcome will be? Do it one-on-one. Don't do it in front of other supervisors or other team members, clients, and so on. Be aware of your nonverbal cues. Again, rolling your eyes, crossed arms. You want to make sure that your body is oriented towards your supervisor. And self-reflect. We have a lot to learn, and every situation is a learning opportunity. Now, taking feedback is something that will occur on a daily basis. Just as you may give your supervisor some feedback or approach them about issues or challenges, your supervisor is responsible for guiding you in the right direction. Taking feedback well is important, but sometimes people have a hard time with feedback. They may defend themselves, choose not to hear what was said, doubt the motives of the other. For example, you may feel like your supervisor is pushing you out of the job rather than helping you grow, denying the validity of the feedback, rationalizing why they behaved that way, and finally making excuses. So, is feedback painful? Well, when someone tells us we didn't do something right or we need to improve our behavior, it could feel painful, but it doesn't have to be. Now, every supervisor will be different in how they coach you, and this will depend on whether or not they are the right fit for you. So, if you recall back to when I talked about getting that job and seeing if that supervisor is the right match, it's important to know how they'll communicate with you and if you would get along with them. So feedback shouldn't be painful. Remember that it's something that is given to help you be a better person and be better with your clients. There's a great book I recommend that you read. It's called Fieldwork and Supervision for Behavior Analysts. The following information is from this book. I went to a conference and got a chance to hear Dr. Ellie Kazemi talk about supervision and her book. And the next few slides that I'll be discussing will highlight some of the information I gathered from her text. A good supervisor will provide accurate feedback about your performance. They'll tell you where the error was and help you learn how to correct it so you can do better. For example, if you and another therapist were chit-chatting on the floor during work hours about your weekend, while the client was sitting playing with a toy, I may pull you and your team member aside and tell you that you need to minimize chit-chatting about personal events during work hours and focus on your client. Our client is our top priority and must be the focus. The feedback is not about your clinical work, but about a personal behavior that is occurring, but it does impact your ethical behavior as well. So is this good feedback, or what I like to call ouch feedback? Supervisor says, "Sarah, what's wrong with you? Did you wake up on the wrong side of the bed?" Or how about the supervisor says, "Sarah, I don't have all day. What do you want?" Well, both of these are inappropriate. There should be a level of respect between the supervisor and the supervisee. A better way of speaking to someone may be to say the following: "Sarah, can we chat quick? You're one of our strongest. Today I feel like something isn't right. Is everything okay? If you need to talk, I'm here for you." So what will you get feedback on? You'll get feedback on your clinical work, ethical and professional skills. But your supervisor may also coach you on your mannerisms, how you dress, and how you interact with others. For example, suppose you're one to speed in the parking lot coming in for the day, and your supervisor notices and sees that this is an unprofessional and dangerous behavior. They may pull you aside to speak to you about this. What if you dyed your hair purple? Could your supervisor say anything about that? Well, they might. If there are policies or professional expectations, they may bring this up to you. So keep that in mind. Speak to your workplace about things like that and think about who you want to be as a paraprofessional. I also tell my staff to think about their dental hygienist, doctor, or dentist, how they dress, talk, and look. Keep in mind, people will comment on how you act, dress, and speak. Your supervisor is your coach, mentor, advisor, and counselor. Remember, this is your go-to person. If you can't go to them or choose not to go to them, then there will be a breakdown in your relationship and overall quality of therapy and service for your client. Sarah is a supervisee and is responsible for maintaining the client's documents. Her supervisor has noticed that her attention to detail is lacking. Because of this, it's unclear to see if the client is improving because of treatment. What's the issue here? The issue is the quality of service is lacking and possibly quality of treatment. So it's important that the supervisor coach the supervisee on proper documentation and graphing to ensure quality of treatment. Sarah is a supervisee and approaches the client's father to provide an update about their son. She says, "Hey Daddy, so Sam was really wild today. I can't believe he ran all over the room. Yeah, so weird, huh?" What's the issue here? Well, your supervisor is required to ensure that you're engaging in ethical and professional behaviors. Speaking to a client in that way would be unprofessional and inappropriate. They'll support your professional growth, competency, productivity, and so on. It's important that you as a paraprofessional do a self-assessment. Evaluate your skills, your behaviors, improvements, areas to improve on, evaluate your skill set. Can you respond to the task list items in defined terms, and so on? Ask for feedback. It's okay to go to your supervisor and ask them to give you feedback on things, professionally, clinically, ethically, and personally. If you're given feedback, be prepared to respond to that feedback appropriately. When given feedback, should you say, "What's your problem, geez," and walk off? Or, yep, okay, yeah. Well, the first one is an absolute no-no. The second one, you might think that it's fine, but you want to take the feedback a little bit more appropriately. In that response, it may not be appropriate or professional. So here are some tips for taking feedback. You want to appreciate the feedback given. Remember, this is a learning opportunity. Say thank you. You can say something like, "Thank you, John. I appreciate the feedback you've given me." But you also want to mean it. You want to avoid rolling your eyes, saying, "Okay, and walking off, or brushing it off like it's not a big deal. If your supervisor has approached you about something, it's a big deal to them or the client or organization. So be mindful of that. Avoid making justifications, getting defensive, or withdrawing. Remember to keep open and honest communication with them. When receiving feedback, you may feel hurt, angry, or disappointed. Don't be hard on yourself. Many times when I've given feedback to supervisees, they get overwhelmed with emotions. It's important to breathe. It's important to acknowledge that they're trying to support you. When I give feedback to staff, I want them to do better. I want them to have a bright future. I want them to grow within the field and advance within the field. Listen to the actual feedback. Sometimes we start hearing other things or making meanings of those things that weren't actually said. So just listen. Acknowledge the feedback and accept it. Restate the feedback and clarify. Sometimes we may not understand what was said, or our emotions get in the way. Just repeat what was said so you understand it. For example, "Okay, I understand that I've been speeding in the parking lot area and you feel that this is unprofessional and dangerous." You then want to appreciate and change the behavior. You can say, "Thank you for letting me know. I didn't realize how fast I was driving. I'll work on that." The best supervisees are the ones that ask for help, nudge their supervisor, take responsibility for the experience, and don't blame their supervisor. It's also important to recognize that sometimes you're not at fault, but knowing how to approach your supervisor about that and discuss the issue. If your supervisor mentions something specific like speeding in the parking lot or your dress code coming into work, or maybe how you spoke to a client, these are things that we may not notice about ourselves, and our supervisor is coaching you about that. But sometimes you may feel your supervisor has given you inaccurate feedback, and you may feel more resistant to accept this kind of feedback. So this is important for you to sit down with your supervisor to understand their perspective, or for them to see your side. No matter what, both you and your supervisor should speak to each other professionally and respectfully. All right, let's jump into the quiz before my final thoughts. Personal relationships with your supervisor is okay. True or false? And the correct response is false. Sarah is an RBT and has noticed that Johnny's problem behaviors have been increasing. What should Sarah do? A. Wait a few more weeks. B. Tell her supervisor. C. Speak to another RBT. Or D. All of the above. And the correct response is B. Tell her supervisor. The sandwich approach is a positive feedback followed by the area of improvement. B. The area of improvement followed by positive feedback. C. Positive feedback followed by an area of improvement and more positive feedback. Or D. None of the above. And the correct response is C. Positive feedback followed by an area of an improvement and more positive feedback. Your supervisor is your A. Mentor, B. Coach, C. Counselor, or D. All of the above. And the correct response is D. All of the above. A barrier to effective communication is A. Fear of relationships, B. Lack of work, C. Fear of damaging work, D. Fear of damaging relationships, or E. None of the above. And the correct response is D. Fear of damaging relationships. A good supervisor will A. Provide accurate feedback, B. Criticize you, C. Be your friend, or D. All of the above. And the correct response is A. Provide accurate feedback. Your supervisor has given you feedback. You should A. Get defensive, B. Appreciate, C. Walk away, D. Engage in deep breathing techniques. And the correct response is B. Appreciate. Appreciate the feedback that you have been given. Now, of course, if you need to do some deep breathing, you sure can do those, but of course, the correct response here would be to appreciate. My final thoughts. This is an important topic, and it's a new addition to the task list that the BACB felt was critical for RBTs to learn about. It's a part of the field that may be lacking when it comes to practice and clinical work. Your relationship with your supervisor should be constant and close. You should be spending much time with them, learning from them, and you should feel the growth within. You want to have a relationship with your supervisor that is respectful and professional. You need to remember that you're not buddies with them. You may find yourself saying, "Hey girly," or "Yo bro," or other ways of speaking that is informal. Although you and your supervisor may find that to be okay, you may want to rethink that so that you're setting clear boundaries and creating the best communication techniques. Don't forget, you need to approach your supervisor immediately when you need clinical direction and support. Don't wait. Speak to your supervisor as quickly as possible. The other thing that I want to talk about and show you as part of your competency assessment is how to track your supervision hours with your supervisor. So I'm going to show you a log, and this is a log that we use at the center. It's really important for you and your supervisor to be tracking your hours, and I'll go through how to fill one out, and this is a great record so that if you ever get audited by the BACB, you can pull this out and you can show them that you were supervised, what days and times, and whether it was an observation or a meeting. We'll go through that and how to actually fill it out. And I hope you enjoyed this class and supervision, and I hope you and your supervisor continue to communicate and build a nice, strong, solid relationship.